I can still remember that fateful day like it was yesterday, though it happened more than a decade ago. The memory of it still sends shivers down my spine, and the truth is, I've never quite been the same since. It was the summer of 2007 when my cousin Jake and I decided to venture into the sprawling cornfields surrounding our small town of Hollowfield. The fields stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of green stalks that swayed gently in the warm breeze. We had heard tales of eerie happenings within those cornfields, stories whispered around campfires and during late-night gatherings, legends of children who had disappeared, never to be seen again, and of strange figures that roamed the fields at night. Jake and I, being the daring teenagers we were, decided it was time to test the validity of those stories. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the cornfield just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced among the rows of corn. Our excitement was palpable as we plunged deeper into the maze. The cornfield was a labyrinth, and it wasn't long before we lost our bearings. The rustling leaves of the cornstalks made it impossible to discern any direction. Panic slowly set in as we realized we were disoriented and hopelessly lost. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but an endless sea of corn. Hours seemed to pass, but it felt like an eternity. We called out to each other, our voices trembling with fear, but the only response was the eerie silence of the cornfield. And then, just when despair was about to consume us entirely, we heard something. A faint, mournful wail echoed through the field, sending a chill down my spine. It was a haunting sound, like a distant cry for help. We followed the sound, stumbling through the cornstalks in the direction of the eerie noise. With each step, the wail grew louder and more desperate. As we pushed deeper into the field, we began to see faint glimmers of light in the distance. It was like fireflies dancing among the cornstalks. We followed the lights, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. The lights led us to a small clearing in the cornfield, and what we saw there will forever haunt my dreams. In the center of the clearing stood a decaying, abandoned farmhouse. It was dilapidated and falling apart, its wooden walls covered in moss and ivy. The windows were shattered, and the front door hung crookedly on its hinges. But what was most unsettling was the sight of dozens of lanterns hanging from the trees surrounding the house, casting an eerie, flickering glow. The wailing had now reached a deafening pitch, emanating from inside the house. With trembling hands, we approached the decaying structure and pushed open the creaking door. The sight that greeted us inside was a nightmare made real. The interior of the farmhouse was a gruesome tableau of horror. Rotting furniture filled the rooms, and the walls were covered in strange symbols and disturbing artwork. But what caught our attention was the source of the wailing. A group of children, their eyes hollow and vacant, trapped in a nightmarish trance. Before we could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, emaciated man with sunken eyes and a twisted smile. He spoke in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. "Welcome to my harvest." In a moment of sheer terror, Jake and I turned and fled from the farmhouse, crashing through the cornstalks as we raced to escape that nightmare. The wailing and laughter of the children echoed in our ears as we ran, the lantern lights flickering behind us. Hours later, we stumbled out of the cornfield, battered and bruised, but alive. We reported what we had seen to the authorities, but when they investigated, the farmhouse and its sinister occupant had vanished without a trace. To this day, I cannot forget the horrors of that cornfield, and I know that what we witnessed was no ordinary occurrence. It was a brush with true evil, an encounter with a malevolent force that should never have existed in our world. Though the town of Hollowfield has moved on, I can never shake the feeling that the cornfield still holds its dark secrets, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into its maze of terror. And I can only hope that they, unlike us, manage to escape the clutches of the haunting of Hollowfield Cornfield. As I sit down to recount the horrors that transpired in that cursed cornfield, I am acutely aware that the truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction. It was the summer of 1997, a time when my family and I lived on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town in the heartland of America. Our modest house nestled in the shadows of an endless sea of cornfields that stretched as far as the eye could see. This is a true story, a nightmarish memory etched deep into my soul. One sweltering August evening, my father, a weathered farmer named Robert, announced that it was time to gather the harvest. The cornfield had always been our source of livelihood, and every year it demanded our toil, sweat, and blood. That year the corn crop had grown unusually thick and tall, casting eerie shadows beneath the pale moonlight. My father, an unyielding man of tradition, insisted on doing things the old-fashioned way. Armed with scythes and burlap sacks, we set out into the cornfield just after dusk. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying scent of corn husks, and an eerie hush blanketed the land. As we worked our way through the rows, I noticed something peculiar. The cornstalks seemed to rustle and sway of their own accord, as if the very earth beneath them had come to life. My father dismissed it as a trick of the wind, but unease gnawed at me like a persistent itch. Hours passed, and the harvest progressed at a slow and grueling pace. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the moonlight. Then, as if the night itself had conspired against us, the moon disappeared behind a thick, ominous cloud, plunging us into darkness. It was then that I first heard it, the soft, mournful whispering that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the cornfield. At first I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my ears, but the voice grew clearer and more distinct with each passing moment. It was a voice filled with sorrow and despair, a voice that seemed to beckon me deeper into the labyrinth of corn. I turned to my father, but his face was a mask of stoic determination. He could not hear it, or perhaps he chose not to. Against my better judgment, I followed the voice, weaving my way through the towering cornstalks. It led me deeper into the heart of the field, where the moonlight struggled to penetrate the dense foliage. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was calling my name. "David," it whispered, as though it knew me intimately. Fear gnawed at my insides, but I couldn't resist its siren song. Then I saw her, a woman, her face obscured by long, tangled hair that hung like a curtain of darkness. She was dressed in tattered rags, and her skeletal fingers reached out to me, beckoning me closer. Her eyes, when they finally emerged from the shadows, were empty voids of darkness. "David," she murmured, her voice a haunting melody, "you must help us. We are trapped here, cursed to wander this field for all eternity." I tried to pull away, to break free from her eerie grasp, but it was as though her fingers were made of iron. Panic surged through me, and I called out for my father, but my voice was swallowed by the corn. As I struggled, I saw them, scores of ghostly figures emerging from the corn, each one more wretched than the last. They moaned and wailed, their faces twisted in eternal torment. I realized then that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The woman's grip tightened, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "You can save us," she hissed. "You can free us from this curse." I had no choice but to listen as she told me the story of the cornfield. A tale of a vengeful spirit, a farmer who had made a dark pact, and a curse that had bound their souls to the very land itself. It was a tale of sacrifice and suffering, of endless torment in the shadow of the corn. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to break the curse, to free these tortured souls from their eternal prison. With a newfound determination, I wrenched myself free from the woman's grasp and ran back through the cornfield, the ghostly figures pursuing me with their mournful cries. I found my father, still toiling in the darkness, and begged him to leave the cursed field. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern, but something in my eyes must have convinced him. Without a word, he dropped his scythe and followed me out of the cornfield. As we crossed the threshold, a deafening roar erupted behind us. I turned to see the cornfield engulfed in flames, an inferno that consumed everything in its path. The ghostly figures howled in agony, their tormented souls finally finding release. We watched in stunned silence as the flames consumed the cornfield, reducing it to ash. The curse had been broken, but at a terrible cost. To this day, I cannot forget the horrors I witnessed in that cornfield, the mournful whispers, the ghostly apparitions, and the vengeful spirit that had bound them all. It was a true horror story, one that still haunts my dreams and serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most innocent of landscapes. As I sit down to recount the events that unfolded at Hollow Acres, the hairs on my arms still prickle with terror. What transpired there was a horror so profound that it haunts my very soul to this day. I offer you my account of a true, horrifying cornfield story, a nightmarish tale that will send shivers down your spine. It was the summer of 1999 when I, a naive 17-year-old boy named Thomas, and my best friend Sam, decided to explore the infamous cornfields of Hollow Acres. The rumors that had swirled around our small town for generations spoke of a malevolent force lurking among the towering stalks. We scoffed at the tales, thinking them the stuff of folklore and superstition. Little did we know, we were about to become part of a real-life nightmare. We set out on a moonless night, armed only with flashlights and our youthful bravado. The cornfields loomed before us, their rustling leaves casting eerie shadows that danced in the pale glow of our torches. We forged ahead, cutting a path through the thick foliage. The cornstalks were unnaturally tall, reaching up to obscure the starry sky, and the air was heavy with an oppressive stillness. As we ventured deeper into the maze-like labyrinth, unease settled over us like a suffocating fog. The path behind us seemed to twist and change, rendering our attempts to retrace our steps futile. Panic gnawed at the edges of our bravado as we realized that we were lost. The cornfield seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls of vegetation closing in on us. We stumbled through the darkness, our heartbeats thundering in our ears. Then we heard it, a faint, distant whisper. The voice was low and guttural, barely discernible, but it sent shivers down our spines. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered. The whisper had ceased, leaving only the rustling of corn leaves in its wake. We continued on, growing more disoriented with every step, when suddenly the whispers returned, now closer, more insistent. "Thomas!" It hissed my name, a sinister mockery of my own voice. Sam gripped my arm, his knuckles white with fear. "What the hell is that?" I had no answer. The whispers multiplied, surrounding us on all sides. They spoke in a cacophony of voices, some resembling our own, others inhuman and grotesque. They whispered secrets I had never shared, memories long forgotten, and fears that lurked deep within my soul. Terror clawed at my chest as I realized that this place, Hollow Acres, held knowledge of our most intimate thoughts and fears. It knew our vulnerabilities and it reveled in our helplessness. Sam and I clung to each other, desperate to escape the relentless onslaught of voices. Then, as if in response to our terror, the cornfield itself seemed to come alive. The towering stalks twisted and contorted, forming grotesque shapes that writhed and moved with unnatural life. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and roots erupted from the soil, snaking their way toward us like serpents. We sprinted through the shifting maze, our flashlights cutting feeble paths through the oppressive darkness. But no matter how fast we ran, the whispers pursued us, growing louder and more deranged with each passing moment. They taunted and mocked, promising unspeakable horrors if we dared to look back. And then, in a horrifying instant, Sam was gone. One moment he was there, running beside me, and the next, he vanished into the darkness. I called out for him, my voice choked with grief and fear, but there was no response. Sam had been swallowed by the malevolent force that inhabited Hollow Acres. I pressed on, alone and broken, my mind consumed by a maddening mixture of grief and terror. The cornfield seemed endless, a nightmarish labyrinth from which there was no escape. The whispers continued to torment me, now taking on Sam's voice, pleading for help, cursing my name and laughing in derision. Hours, perhaps days, passed in that hellish nightmare. I stumbled and fell, my body battered and bruised. I no longer had the strength to resist the relentless onslaught of voices. They invaded my mind, tearing at my sanity, and I could feel myself slipping into madness. And then, just as I was on the brink of surrender, a faint glimmer of dawn broke through the dense cornfield. With renewed determination, I pushed forward, my body driven by a primal instinct to survive. The whispers grew weaker as the first light of day banished the malevolent force that had plagued Hollow Acres. Finally, I burst through the wall of corn and into the open fields beyond. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath and sobbing with relief. I had escaped the clutches of Hollow Acres, but at a terrible cost. Sam was gone, lost forever to the horrors of that cursed place. To this day, I am haunted by the memory of that night. I bear the scars, both physical and emotional, of my ordeal in the cornfield of Hollow Acres. I know now that the stories were not mere superstition, but a chilling testament to the evil that dwells in the darkest corners of our world. So, heed my warning, dear reader, and never venture into the cornfields of Hollow Acres, for there are terrors there that defy explanation and nightmares that will haunt you for the rest of your days. It was the summer of 1997 when my friends and I embarked on a horrifying journey into the cornfields that bordered our small town. This tale isn't one that you'll find in any newspaper or book, but it's etched deep in the memory of those who dared to venture into those rustling, endless rows of maize. I'm sharing this story now, not to seek fame, but to provide a warning to anyone who may be tempted to tread that dark and desolate path. My name is Mark, and I was just a teenage boy at the time. My friends, Tom and Rachel, were equally intrigued by the ominous tales surrounding the cornfields that stretched far beyond our homes. Stories of missing animals, inexplicable events, and eerie encounters with unseen forces had circulated throughout the town for as long as we could remember. Those tales sent shivers down our spines, but the reckless curiosity of youth compelled us to investigate. One moonless night, under the cover of darkness, we donned our heavy jackets and set out with flashlights in hand. The air was thick with a suffocating silence as we entered the seemingly endless expanse of corn. The stalks towered above us, blocking out the moon and stars. Our beams of light revealed only the cornstalks before us, as if we were trapped in a never-ending labyrinth. The chill in the air was palpable, and a sense of unease settled in our hearts. But we continued forward, fueled by youthful bravado and the desire to uncover the truth behind the whispered stories. Time lost meaning in that labyrinthine sea of corn, and it felt like hours had passed before we stumbled upon something that would forever haunt our dreams. Amidst the towering stalks, we discovered a small clearing, barely big enough to contain a ramshackle, weather-worn shack. The structure's wood was gray and warped, as though it had stood there for centuries. A decrepit scarecrow loomed before it, its tattered clothing billowing in the gentle breeze. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow us, and its twisted grin sent shivers down our spines. Tom, always the fearless one, stepped closer to inspect the shack. It exuded an otherworldly presence, and even our flashlights couldn't pierce the darkness within. As he approached the door, a harsh whisper echoed through the field, chilling us to our bones. "Leave this place!" it hissed, sending us reeling back in terror. We exchanged fearful glances, unsure of where the voice had originated. Panic surged within us, but our curiosity was not so easily quelled. We couldn't leave without answers, so we regrouped and slowly approached the shack once more. As Tom reached for the door, the voice grew louder, more vehement. "I warned you!" it seethed, and a sharp gust of wind slammed the door open with a deafening creak. Tom, now as pale as a ghost, hesitated for a moment before he entered. Inside the shack, we found nothing but darkness, save for an ancient oil lamp that flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. A sense of dread consumed us as we ventured deeper into the shack, our flashlights revealing strange markings etched into the walls, symbols we couldn't decipher, but which sent a shiver down our spines. Rachel spotted a tattered journal hidden beneath a pile of moldy blankets. Its pages were filled with frantic scribblings, recounting the experiences of a man who had once lived in this very shack. He spoke of a malevolent presence that tormented him, a force that seemed to emanate from the very cornfields themselves. The man had ventured into the cornfields to uncover its secrets, much like we had, but he had paid a heavy price. The presence had driven him to madness, and he believed it was the source of all the strange occurrences in the town. The missing animals, the unexplained phenomena, and the strange disappearances of those who ventured too deep into the fields. As we read, the whispering voice returned, now louder and more menacing than ever. It seemed to emanate from all around us, suffocating us with its malevolence. "You should have listened," it taunted. Terrified, we fled the shack, leaving the journal behind. The cornfield had transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, with the voice pursuing us relentlessly. We ran blindly, our flashlights flickering, until we stumbled upon a long-abandoned farmhouse. We barricaded ourselves inside, hoping to escape the relentless voice that now echoed through the very walls of the house. Hours passed, and the voice persisted, growing louder and more deranged. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't escape. As the first rays of dawn broke, the voice finally subsided. Exhausted and traumatized, we emerged from the farmhouse, vowing never to return to those accursed cornfields. We never spoke of our harrowing experience to anyone, fearing ridicule or disbelief. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memories of the whispering cornfields and the malevolent presence within the shack still haunt my dreams. I share this tale now, not to seek attention or fame, but as a warning to all who might be tempted to venture into those dark and endless rows of maze. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that are best left undisturbed. The cornfields hold secrets that should never be unearthed, for the price of curiosity may be one's sanity or worse.